Meghan Markle flew to Geneva to talk about children's online safety. She ended up generating a completely different conversation entirely, and the specific way that happened reveals something important about the challenge she is now facing every time she steps in front of a camera.
Meghan Markle's shocking humiliation in Geneva finally proves that she has just gone mad.
And the gap between what she intended and what actually happened tells you everything about where things stand for her right now. That gap is not a new story. It has been appearing with increasing regularity over the past year. Every time a major public appearance is planned, every time a new initiative is launched, the stated purpose and the actual conversation that follows end up in different places. But Geneva crystallized it more clearly than most previous events, because the distance between intention and outcome was so large and so visible, and because the contradictions arrived so quickly. So today, we are going to walk through exactly what happened. Not just the headline controversies, but the specific way they connected and compounded each other throughout the week. Because understanding Geneva means understanding how three separate things, individually manageable, together devastating, combined to turn a serious humanitarian event into a week of PR chaos. Let's go. And pay attention to how each thread connects to the others, because the three things that dominated the conversation did not operate independently. They fed each other.
It was the moment, the major defeat on her face, when she realized that no one had bothered to show up for what was a catastrophic speech, a hypocritical speech, a speech which blows out of the water every single thing that she has argued in terms of her brand.
And understanding how they did that is how you understand why Geneva went so wrong so quickly despite every apparent advantage the event had going into it. The event was the World Health Organization's discussions on children's digital safety. Meghan appeared alongside WHO Director General Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus near the famous Broken Chair Monument in Geneva, a permanent installation outside the United Nations complex that has become one of the city's most recognizable landmarks. She gave a speech about harmful algorithms, addictive platform design, artificial intelligence, and the responsibility of governments and technology companies to create genuinely safer digital environments for young people. She called for stronger protections. She compared unregulated digital products to physical products that would never be permitted on the market without safety testing. She spoke about algorithmic systems designed to maximize engagement regardless of the harm that engagement causes. She argued for international cooperation on standards that would hold technology companies accountable in ways current regulation does not. On paper, it looked like exactly the kind of platform she has been trying to build since leaving royal life. International, serious, connected to a genuinely important global issue that resonates with parents and policymakers across the political spectrum. The Archwell Foundation has been working toward this kind of institutional credibility for years, positioning the couple not as former royals seeking validation, but as legitimate advocates operating in the space of international child welfare and policy. The Geneva appearance was designed to demonstrate that positioning had arrived.
She was assigned to a bus stop. Look at that. Look at in the red circle. So actually, the woman who everyone's saying is there to watch was actually just trying to get home. Meghan's mole pointed out that even the Sussex squaddies couldn't be bothered to go to Geneva to support Meghan Markle.
Everything about the event was constructed to reinforce that image. The WHO partnership, the Geneva location, the subject matter, the setting. It was supposed to be clean, a moment where the image matched the substance and the occasion matched both. But within hours of footage starting to circulate online, the speech itself was almost an afterthought, because the internet had found something else to talk about. Three things, as it turned out. And by the time the week was out, none of them were about children's digital safety. Let's go through each one. The first thing people noticed was the crowd. Or rather, what critics immediately framed as the absence of one. Though, as we will get to, the reality was more complicated than the social media version of it. As photos and videos from the event spread across social media, viewers started zooming in and asking questions. Several clips showed pedestrians walking past the area while Meghan was speaking, not stopping, not pausing, not even turning their heads toward whatever was happening nearby. continuing about their afternoon as if nothing particularly notable was occurring. Cars moved along the streets. Tourists wandered past. A few people appeared to be watching, but critics argued that many of those present were likely connected to the event itself. Staff, security, journalists, WHO representatives and their teams. The giant broken chair monument, a permanent installation near the United Nations buildings that has become one of Geneva's most recognizable landmarks and attracts steady foot traffic from visitors every day, appeared to generate more spontaneous interest from the general public than the speech being delivered a short distance away. Critics quickly seized on the footage. Screenshots highlighting apparently empty or sparse sections of the surrounding area began circulating within minutes. Video clips were paused, zoomed in, and replayed frame by frame.
Relentless algorithms, exploitative engagement, and endless exposure to harmful content that they are not seeking out.
I guess 4-year-old Lily didn't seek out her starring role in selling Meghan's outfit either, did she?
Observers who had long argued that Meghan's global influence was being significantly overstated pointed to the images as visual evidence. Whether those critics were being fair, whether attendance at an outdoor policy event near a tourist landmark is a meaningful measure of anything, is a separate question. The point is that the images spread and the narrative attached to them spread faster than any counter-narrative could follow. That footage circulated at exactly the wrong moment. Just days before, photographs from Princess Catherine's engagements in Italy had generated the kind of coverage that senior working royals routinely produce wherever they go. Large crowds, people who had waited for hours to be there, streets packed with genuine public enthusiasm. The kind of scenes that have become the expected backdrop of a major royal tour, and that serve as a reminder of what the institution of the monarchy still generates in terms of raw public attention. The contrast was immediate and it was brutal. Social media users placed the two sets of images side by side. Some did it fairly, acknowledging that a policy speech at an international organization and a royal tour walkabout are not equivalent events and that attendance comparisons are not perfectly meaningful. Many did not bother with those caveats. Supporters of Catherine argued this demonstrated the enormous, ongoing power of the institution. The argument being that the monarchy generates a kind of public attention that celebrity advocacy, however credentialed, simply cannot replicate. Critics of Meghan argued Geneva exposed something Harry himself once refused to acknowledge: that much of the attention the couple attracted during their royal years was directed at the institution they were part of, not at them as individuals, and that once you remove the crown from the equation, the crowd does not automatically follow the person. Whether that argument is entirely fair or not is a legitimate debate. The contexts were different. The purposes were different. The crowds were drawn for structurally different reasons. But fairness is not really the operative factor in a social media comparison cycle. The comparison spread because it was visually striking, because it fed an existing narrative, and because it dominated the conversation for days in a way that pulled focus completely away from anything Meghan had actually said. If Palace Insider is giving you the picture that other channels skip, hit the like button. It genuinely helps us reach more people. The second thing people noticed was the Instagram post. And this one is harder to dismiss than the crowd question. Before Meghan arrived in Geneva, she shared a photo on Instagram. The image appeared casual at first glance. She was in what looked like a dressing area, preparing for the day ahead. Near her feet was her 4-year-old daughter Lilibet in what Meghan captioned as a mama's little helper moment. The kind of warm, accessible family content that generates millions of views and communicates a certain kind of relatable celebrity motherhood. But the internet looked at this one very carefully. Hanging prominently in the frame were the clothes she would wear at the event. The blazer, the shoes, the carefully arranged outfit already on display in the background. Critics argued it did not look like a spontaneous family moment. It looked like a composed shot with luxury fashion items deliberately framed and visible, strategically released ahead of an international appearance, using her daughter as the emotional anchor for content that also served other purposes. Whether that specific reading is correct is impossible to know from the outside. What is not impossible to observe is that the image was shared with millions of followers on the morning of a major international speech about protecting children from the harms of online exposure. Because a few hours later, Meghan stood in front of cameras at the WHO event and gave a passionate address about exactly that subject. About the harm that comes from exposing children to public platforms without meaningful consent. About algorithmic exploitation of young people. About the responsibility of adults to create digital environments that genuinely protect children rather than simply profiting from their presence in them. And the photograph of her 4-year-old daughter was sitting on her Instagram account, posted hours earlier, available to the millions of followers who had liked it, shared it, and spread it further. Critics did not need to exaggerate the contradiction. It was sitting there in plain view. The same woman warning about the damage done by exposing children to online scrutiny had just shared a carefully framed image of her own small child to an account with a multi-million follower count on the morning of a speech about that exact issue. Journalist Tom Sykes raised the question directly and with some precision. His argument was not about crowd size or royal competition. It was about the internal logic of Meghan's stated position. A 4-year-old cannot understand what social media is. A 4-year-old cannot consent to having their image distributed globally to millions of strangers. And a partial image, a face not fully shown, a figure positioned at the edge of a frame, does not confer the privacy that might seem to be implied. In some cases, a partially revealed image generates more sustained curiosity than a straightforward photograph, because it invites speculation and repeat engagement from people who want to see more. These arguments were not new. They were arguments Harry and Meghan have themselves made repeatedly when criticizing press coverage of their children. The same logic, applied to Meghan's own social media activity, produced the same conclusions. What made the criticism more damaging than usual was where some of it was coming from. It was not only from royal commentators who have been skeptical of Meghan for years, people whose criticism is easy for her team to categorize as motivated opposition and dismiss accordingly. It was coming from observers who had engaged with the substance of her stated position on children's privacy, taken it seriously as an argument worth evaluating, and then applied the same logic consistently to her own behavior. That kind of criticism is harder to absorb and harder to explain away because it is not rooted in hostility. It is rooted in the principles Meghan herself has articulated publicly. When your critics are using your own arguments against you, you cannot simply argue that they are wrong without also arguing that you were wrong about the principles in the first place. The irony that the conversation about a speech on children's online safety was being driven by an Instagram post featuring a child, shared with millions of followers, did not require any editorial framing to land. It was visible on the face of the situation, and that visibility is part of what made it so damaging, not because it required exaggeration or spin, but because it did not. Subscribe to Palace Insider and drop a comment below. The conversation has been seriously good this week. The third thing that dominated the conversation was a gesture, a tiny one, a few seconds at the end of the speech that, in any other context, would have passed entirely unnoticed. As Meghan reached her emotional conclusion, urging leaders, parents, and technology companies to act, asking future generations to look back and see that the right decisions were made today, cameras caught a brief movement. She touched her nose. That was it. A split-second, completely ordinary physical reflex. But this is Meghan Markle in 2026, and when it comes to her public appearances, almost nothing goes unnoticed. Within hours, the clip was circulating across every major platform. Users slowed it down. They zoomed in. They replayed the final seconds on loop. Entire threads emerged, trying to interpret what the gesture meant. Was she emotional? Nervous? Covering something? Simply dealing with a physical reflex under the pressure of a high-stakes address in front of cameras? Nobody knows. Nobody could possibly know from watching a few seconds of footage. And that uncertainty is precisely why it spread so far. The honest answer is that it was almost certainly nothing. A completely natural physical response to the pressure of delivering an international speech at an event that had already attracted significant unwanted scrutiny before she even finished speaking. People touch their faces constantly and unconsciously. It means nothing. But it landed in the worst possible context. The attendance questions were still running. The Instagram controversy had not resolved. The comparisons with Catherine were everywhere. And now there was another clip to analyze. Another moment to replay, another small fragment that became its own conversation and pulled attention further from the message. In a strange way, it became the perfect symbol for the entire Geneva appearance. Every time the focus seemed about to settle on the actual cause, something arrived to redirect it. The crowd, the Instagram post, the comparisons, the gesture. Each element individually was manageable. Together, they created a week in which the stated purpose of the event, children's online safety, barely featured in the conversation that followed. And the speech itself did not escape scrutiny either, once people eventually got around to examining what she had actually said. On the substance, Meghan's argument was coherent and broadly in line with a real and genuinely important debate happening around the world right now. Governments across multiple countries are already wrestling with social media age restrictions for minors. Concerns about screen addiction, cyberbullying, algorithmic exploitation, and the documented mental health impacts of digital platforms on young people are serious policy questions that deserve serious attention. She was not wrong to raise them, and the fact that the week became chaotic does not make the underlying issue less important or the speech less substantive. But critics raised a specific concern about the framing that was harder to dismiss than the usual opposition noise. Some listeners felt that parts of the speech moved beyond child safety, narrowly defined and into broader territory. Language about algorithmic accountability, content moderation, and what kinds of information people are permitted to encounter online. For some listeners, that represented a natural extension of the child safety argument, since harmful content reaching children through recommendation systems is a real and documented problem. For others, it began to sound like something with different and more contested implications about who should control what people are able to read and watch. That distinction matters because it determines who the speech is actually for and who is likely to hear it sympathetically. A speech focused specifically on protecting children from exploitation and harm has a fairly wide and politically diverse constituency. A speech that edges into broader content regulation territory touches a much more contested political space, with advocates and opponents distributed very differently. The WHO involvement added its own layer of complexity. The organization is known primarily for traditional public health, disease, medicine, vaccination, global healthcare infrastructure. Its role in digital content policy is not obvious, and several serious observers questioned how it had arrived at this particular territory and what its actual expertise in the area was. Some argued that associating the speech with the WHO was intended to lend institutional credibility to a policy argument that might otherwise be questioned. Others simply asked what exactly the WHO's authority in this space was. These were not unreasonable questions. They did not dominate the conversation, but they added to a sense that the Geneva event was operating in more contested and complicated space than the framing of a clean humanitarian moment was designed to suggest. By the end of the week, one uncomfortable reality had become very difficult to argue with. The story Meghan wanted people to discuss was children's digital safety. The story the internet wanted to discuss was Meghan Markle. And those were not the same story. They were not even in the same conversation for most of the week. The cause she flew to Geneva to champion barely featured in the coverage the event generated. What makes this particularly difficult for her to address is that the problems compound each other in ways that individual PR responses cannot resolve. Responding publicly to the crowd comparison draws more attention to the crowd comparison. Explaining the Instagram post prolongs the conversation about the contradiction. Engaging with the gesture keeps the clip in circulation for another news cycle. The standard tools, denial, explanation, counter-narrative, tend to make each of these specific situations worse rather than better, because they require engaging with the thing you are trying to move past. The only effective response would be time, consistency, and a period where the behavior and the stated values align clearly enough for long enough that the accumulated contradictions begin to lose their grip. That is a longer project than any single speech in any single city could deliver, and one that requires the kind of sustained consistency that the current configuration has not yet demonstrated. Which is perhaps the most honest and accurate thing that can be said about the entire Geneva week. Not that it was a disaster in isolation, but that it revealed a problem too large and too structural for any individual appearance to resolve. The underlying problem that Geneva exposed is one that has been building for some time. And it is worth being specific about what that problem actually is, because the vague observation that Meghan generates controversy does not fully capture it. Meghan is now operating across multiple public identities simultaneously, and they are starting to pull against each other in ways that become sharply visible at moments exactly like this one. Not because any single element of her public life is uniquely damaging, but because the combination creates a situation where every lane she tries to operate in generates its own friction, and those frictions arrive simultaneously. There is Meghan, the global humanitarian advocate. The woman speaking at international organizations, delivering speeches about children's safety and global well-being, standing alongside figures like the WHO Director General, positioning herself as someone whose voice belongs in serious policy conversations about technology, governance, and the protection of vulnerable populations. This version requires institutional credibility, policy substance, and consistency between stated values and visible behavior. It requires audiences to take the messenger at face value. Then there is Meghan, the lifestyle brand and Instagram personality. The carefully composed family photographs, the outfit reveals, the product associations, the commercially adjacent content that keeps the Sussex brand financially relevant and publicly visible in ways that international speeches alone cannot sustain. This version requires a willingness to share aspects of private life with the public for commercial and cultural purposes, because that is what the brand depends on. Then there is Meghan the celebrity, whose every public moment is examined through the lens of years of accumulated controversy. The Oprah interview, the Netflix documentary, the memoir, the staff disputes, the palace accusations, the ongoing Sussex versus institution narrative that follows her into every new context whether she wants it there or not. This version is not something she chooses. It is the environment she operates in, but it shapes how everything she does is received, regardless of her intentions. Those three versions coexist uneasily and increasingly visibly. The humanitarian advocate is undermined when the lifestyle brand content becomes the story. The lifestyle brand is complicated when it appears alongside humanitarian messaging that the brand content seems to contradict. And both are constantly refracted through the celebrity controversy lens that makes genuinely neutral coverage structurally very difficult to produce or sustain. Geneva was supposed to demonstrate that she could operate cleanly in the humanitarian space without the other versions pulling the narrative off course. Without the Instagram content undermining the speech, without the personal scrutiny overwhelming the cause, without the accumulated weight of years of controversy providing the dominant interpretive frame. The week showed that she cannot. At least not yet. Not in this configuration. The different parts of her public identity have not been sufficiently separated for any one of them to operate without the others arriving in the room alongside it. None of this means the issues she discussed are unimportant. Children's digital safety deserves serious policy attention from credible advocates, and the fact that the week around this speech became difficult does not diminish the genuine importance of the subject matter or suggest that Meghan is wrong to be involved in this policy space. None of it means Meghan cannot evolve in ways that eventually resolve some of these tensions. Reputations change. The relationship between a public figure and their audience can shift substantially with enough consistent, credible behavior in one direction over enough time. There are examples of public figures who have successfully rebuilt the relationship between their stated values and their visible behavior after periods where the gap between them became the dominant story. But those changes take time, consistency, and, crucially, a period where the behavior and the stated values align clearly enough that the contradictions begin to lose their grip. They cannot be achieved through a single well-designed event or a single strategically chosen international platform. They require the accumulation of evidence pointing in the right direction across dozens of appearances and decisions over an extended period. That is a longer project than any single speech in any single city could deliver, and one that requires the kind of sustained consistency that the current configuration has not yet demonstrated, which is perhaps the most honest and accurate thing that can be said about the entire Geneva week. Not that it was a disaster in isolation, but that it revealed a problem too large and too structural for any individual appearance to resolve. So here's the question. Do you think Meghan can eventually separate her advocacy work from the controversies that keep pulling the conversation back to her personally? Or has the pattern become too established at this point for any individual appearance to meaningfully shift it? And if you think she can change the dynamic, what would that actually need to look like? Drop your answer in the comments below. Subscribe to Palace Insider so you do not miss what comes next. And a like really does help us reach more people. See you in the next one.